And we're live. Welcome back to another Corona Geek here, where we talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. I'm your host, Charles McKeever, and today we're going to talk about Transition Library, how to use it to create motion in your apps. And we're also going to talk about game design. We're starting a brand new game design series, a game development series, where we're going to take a game that exists already. We're going to break down the different elements of it, and then we're going to actually make or reproduce as closely as possible without, completely duplicating everything, that game, so that we can all understand the different mechanics that go into a game and all the different parts and pieces that we might need, from everything from planning to putting it together to being able to have a finished product at the end. So thanks for joining us today. Today we've got Mr. Ed Marina from roaminggamer.com. If you haven't checked out Ed's stuff in the past, you definitely need to go over to roaminggamer.com, and he's got game templates over there. He's got a library for making things simpler. And we spent a lot of time before the show actually talking about this, the fact that there are so many things that are can be tedious. Even though Corona makes things a lot simpler than most, there's still things that you'd rather do in one line than maybe 10 lines of code. So Ed's got some great stuff over at roaminggamer.com to help you kind of speed up your development. So go check that out. So thanks, Ed, for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for smoothing over the way I say things. I'm so rough in the way I describe things, and you say it so much more nicely.
Well, after 129 shows, you get to the point where you can say things. I think in the beginning I was saying your domain name wrong and stuff. So hopefully we smooth out over time.
Right.
But thanks for that. Yeah. So last time, if you weren't here with us, we talked about creating custom composer library transitions, and Ed went through a whole thing, which I thought was kind of interesting, Ed, the whole conversation about sort of reverse engineering the composer library transitions and being able to figure out that, you can create your own custom transitions. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, one, I encourage people to say, hey, I got a problem. Wait a minute. Maybe I can dig into this somehow with what I have available to me in my knowledge basket or toolbox and figure it out. But two, for people who are more advanced, consider the fact that you may not be really using everything that's in Corona because you're not looking deep enough. You're not thinking, hey, maybe I can get in there and mess with the guts if I just explore a little bit.
Yeah, I would have never considered kind of like I said, reverse engineering, or digging into the guts to figure out how does it do what it's doing, because I want to do something else. That's kind of cool. So a lot of undocumented features there, and then it was a combination of forum posts and contribution by forum members and things like that. So that was a good conversation. If you didn't check that out, number 128, go look at it. Also, there was a good discussion that Ed put in about case-sensitive error detection. So Ed created a module that allows it to pick up whether or not you have case-sensitive errors between platforms. So Windows, or not Windows, Apple, iOS or Android, and I guess maybe Windows. The Windows platform have
absolutely. OS 10 and Windows, neither of those environments is case sensitive. So if you spell you have a coronageek.png and it starts with an uppercase C, and then in your game as you're typing you put lowercase c, that's not going to work when it gets on the device. But it's going to work fine in the simulator, and you're going to be real frustrated, especially if you're newer, when you go to run your game. You say, hey, it was working fine in the simulator, and now I got nothing. I got a black screen. What's going on?
So go check out that show. There was the error detection module that we talked about, and the link to it is in the show notes, so you can go download it and add it to your project, and it'll help you get past that, so you don't have to get hung up on it. And also, there was a conversation about removing modules when loading sprites, when you were loading things up into a composer scene. So that was a good conversation as well. So we broke all those up into snippets. There are, I think, 5 different videos that came off of last week's conversation. So go check those out. You can find them at youtube.com/coronageek. And while you're there, go ahead and subscribe. And if you thumbs up and comment on the videos, it sure helps. We do appreciate it. Also, topics. Speaking of topics, you know, the things that we talk about on the show, there's a running list of show topics in the forums. We'll put a link in the show notes for this show. You can go over there and you can add your suggestions to the list, because what we want to talk about here are the things that are important to you, the things that maybe you don't understand, or the things that you want to learn more about, or you're getting hung up on, and that's what that list is for. So go and check it out and leave your suggestions. Help us out. And one of the bit of news here is that Mike over at Crave Creative is still running his sale on Corona widget themes. So if you haven't been over there in a while, check it out. You go over to cravecreative.com, click on the Developer Resources tab, and he's got several different widget theme packs that are split up into different styles. So everything is included in the download, so you can get the images and the source code and all that, and you can either look at what he's done and be able to use it as a model for what you can do in the future, or if you're just kind of not into that kind of stuff at all and you just want to grab something and go, then you can save $5 when you go over to cravecreative.com right now and make your purchase. And then go ahead.
What's the game of the month?
And the game of the month is Crossy Road. So this, for February, we are playing Crossy Road. That was suggested to us by Tyler McGraw, and so thank you, Tyler. And if you haven't played Crossy Road so far, it's kind of a throwback to Frogger, for all those who remember Frogger, who I'm sure there's a lot of people who played it. And but it's got a kind of it's got a different feel to it. It's certainly not up and down, kind of the old style Frogger, bottom of the screen, top of the screen sort of thing. But it's got introduces a whole bunch of different characters, and you can kind of unlock them, and it's fun. I mean, I know my daughter, every time she plays it, she's like, "I unlocked the dragon for you, Dad." And I'm like, "Okay, cool, yay." So I'm a ninja master at this game, and I haven't even.
Sounds like your daughter's a ninja master.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. My kids unlock most of the stuff that I get to enjoy. So if you're really hard up for a high score and you need help with that, pass it to your child. This is how the game is system. But basically, what you want to do is you want to play the game, play Crossy Road, take a screenshot of your high score, and then go over to facebook.com/coronageek and share that on the Facebook wall. And then on March 2nd, we're going to announce the winner, and the winner gets a $50 gift card to the online retailer of their choice. So all you have to do is play games and earn yourself a $50 gift card. So how easy could that be? So go check out Crossy Road, and let's have some fun. Let's see here. Well, I think that's it. I want to save enough time for our topics for today as possible. So we're going to talk about, first up, I think we're going to talk about transition library. And I don't know how you feel about it, Ed, but it seems like transition library is kind of the workhorse of motion, at least in Corona. So I've got the documentation. I wanted to bring up the documentation before we start our conversation here.
All right, that's a good idea.
Yeah, let me just grab my screen over here.
Especially the easings page, people often don't notice.
Yeah, let's see here. Can you see my screen now?
I can in fact see your screen.
Okay. Yeah, and it's real. I mean, we won't spend a lot of time here because I know you've got some examples and code and stuff to walk through, but I just want to kind of draw people's attention to the documentation because it's pretty straightforward. And some of the items here I thought we could just kind of talk about real quick that are interesting is the fact that you can pause the transition. So if you have a transition that's in play, then you can pause it or resume it. I also thought it was interesting, and I'm not sure if you have this in your examples or not, but I thought it was interesting that you can tag certain transitions, so you can specifically name and address those transitions. Mm-hmm. And also being able to have, I like to hear it talks about having more than one transition at a time, or more than one on an object at one time, and then you can pause or resume that object globally. So if you have like a separate movement or a separate fade transition on an object, then you can kind of affect both of those at the same time. So I thought that was really interesting. And then the other thing that is kind of worth pointing out here is there's 42 easing methods, built into Corona into this transition library. And I thought that's pretty significant. It comes with some out of the box functionality, kind of ready to go. You don't have to figure out all those different types of easings to apply to your tween. So you have anything to talk about there, or anything?
Yeah, scroll back up a little bit so I can talk to your points there. I just one, I agree with you absolutely that it is the workhorse. It is a workhorse among two different ways of moving things. You're basically two ways of moving things. Three, programmatically by yourself. That kind of sucks. No good. No fun. I'll say that nicely. Transitions, I use it all the time. In fact, I would say that I've almost never written a single game or app that did not use at least one transition in it. And more often than not, transitions dominate the movement within my games and apps. And then, of course, physics, which I believe, and I would suggest to people that they not combine physics and transitions, although you may, in certain cases, do so. There are appropriate cases. So I agree that it is a workhorse. And I just wanted to say, you asked me, you didn't know if, you said, I don't know if these are in your examples. And pause, resume, cancel tags, all that good stuff. We will talk about that, but not today. I consider those sort of like intermediate level discussion, and I wanted to just do basic talk today. And in the future, we can talk about more of the advanced features or intermediate features.
Okay, that's good. Let me just go back to the statement you made just a moment ago about transitions and physics, not using them together. So give us just a short answer as to why that might be.
Well, okay, so within physics, or when you're using physics, one of the ways, among a few, to move a body is to use the set linear velocity, or you could use apply force or apply impulse. So set linear velocity, what you're saying is give this physics body a specific movement rate. It moves a certain rate in x and a certain rate in y. Then you could apply a force alternately, and what that does is it applies a certain amount of force for one frame, and then you need to continue to apply that every frame, and what it does is accelerates the object. Finally, impulse, which is you do it once. It's sort of like you could think of it as sort of like a strong force, which is only done once. And it's like hitting the object and giving it, like bouncing it in a sense. So those are all great ways to move things with physics, but then transitions themselves, you could say move the object from this x position to this x position, or this y position to this y position, or a combination thereof. So imagine that you have set the linear velocity of an object to be, say, moving upward, so in the negative y direction, but then you do a transition. You could do a transition where it is transitioning from one x position to another, and those two would work fine because they're not conflicting. You're modifying the x with the transition and the y with the set linear velocity. But as soon as you say transition in the y, that will dominate. Whatever the physics engine did doesn't matter, because the transition, I believe, is going to execute last, and that is going to be what the user sees. So it was pointless to do both together.
So while they both create movement, the overlapping behavior, doesn't make sense to use overlapping behaviors.
Not necessarily. I mean, there are always cases. I don't like to say, oh, never do it.
Never say
there are
never.
Cases, and I've found many cases myself where it makes sense to do this. But generally, I would suggest, especially for somebody newer to game development, is learn about transitions, use them for your game if you want to, and then if you're going to play with physics, but don't combine transitions and physics to move your player or your enemies until you get a better understanding. For example, one great example of a way to use both together is if you've ever played Galaga, making those little curving paths. That's a beautiful use of physics combined with transitions. The transitions are great. They would be great for making that curving S path. But at the same time, you've got the physics part of this thing going on. So you've got the collision detection, you've got all the other good stuff happening, and you've done a good combination.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to make sure I know sometimes we say things on the show. It's kind of like just want to follow it up with a why.
Yeah. In fact, I would suggest that although we're doing a very basic game, in terms of the mechanics for this first one. In the future, it's completely possible that we might examine a game that would combine physics and transitions.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I know that you've created some samplers and some code and things like that. So
Yeah. So let me go ahead and bring my screen up.
Okay.
And I will discuss what we've got.
Okay. Excellent. And we just so everybody knows, the code for this is going to be available, so you can download it, play with it, and edit it and use it in your projects and stuff. Just as all the code has been made available in the previous discussions. So we did a whole series previously on Composer, and throughout all of those video postings, you can find the links in the show notes that go to the repos, so you can download the code and mess with those as well. So we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to lay their hands on the code that we're talking about.
Lay your hands on the code. Sounds so right. If you go to GitHub and you go to Mom and Gamer,
lay hands on the code.
That's right. Lay hands on the code. You will see that there is a Corona Geek repository, and under there is the Hangouts repository, repository. And then today we're going to be talking about transitions, and these links will be given in the show. But just in case you're hunting, I suggest you do is go take a look at what I've got. You'll see that we have a transitions folder with a number of different subfolders. Each of these is examples that I'll talk about. And there is another folder here called I Can Make That, which will be where I put all of the game work that we do on the show. So for example, the game we're doing today is Zigzag Boom, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But as time goes by, there should be more and more game clones or game examples here, and more just general content underneath the Hangouts folder.
Cool. Yeah, and I would encourage anybody who is out there poking around at the repo to go ahead and just hit the download button for the whole blooming thing and just bring it all down, because there's lots of great examples and snippets in there. And if you go back and watch any of the previous shows, you'll be able to make great use of those. And if not, I know Ed does a great job of documenting everything and making comments in his code. So it's just good stuff, no matter how you slice it.
Well, I appreciate that. I was going to say maybe I don't do a great job on the comments, but I try. So,
well, you put comments in. That's a good start.
Yeah, it's a start. It's something. I've lost my screen here. Hold on.
Yeah, we can see it. I don't know about you.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. All right. So, before I show you what we're going to talk about today, I just want to show you what's in the folder for people who sort of want to get ahead. If you download the Transitions Examples folder, you're going to see 5 different subfolders. One called Basics, another one called Easings, Intermediate, Custom, and then what I called Ask Ed. Out of these, 1, 2, 4, and 5 are finished. The Intermediate folder is currently pretty much not empty, but not functional. So don't expect that to have useful code in it today. I'm going to do some more work on that before we do the next show. So what we're going to talk about today is the basics, but I forgot to mention is the Ask Ed folder is sort of like an accumulation of answers to forum questions where the person was asking a question, and when I answered, the answer involved transitions in some way. And so there are basically 4 examples. There's a duplicate, rotate about point, that utilize transitions to solve some kind of an interesting problem. And I would encourage people simply to go look at the examples, run them, and say, oh, well, that's what it's doing. And then you can dig into the code and see how I use transitions to answer the question. And I think almost invariably I put the link to the forum post in these. If I didn't, I apologize. But I'm pretty sure that I do put the link in the main.lua file. So, basics. What are transitions? First, I'm not an expert in the sense that I believe transitions come out of Flash and other technologies out there, and that they have become adopted in game engines after they were long since used in web development and stuff like that. But in a nutshell, if I were asked to describe transitions, I would call them a method for changing an attribute on an object over time. And then the way you would change that attribute can be varied with what are called easings. So for example, an attribute we could change on an object is the x position. We could change x from 0, let's say the object started at x0, and change it to 100 over 1 second. And what would happen is the object would visually seem to move from 0 to x100 in 1 second. And then we could change this using a different, varied easings. One of these easings we could use, the traditional one, the standard one, is linear, so that it moves at a rate of 100 pixels, 0 to 100, over 1 second in small slices, and it moves evenly. Or we could use a different easing, like, let's see, in-out circ. And so what that would do is it would move quickly in the beginning portion, then a little more slowly in the middle portion of the move, and then quickly again at the end. And you pointed out the link, but there's 42 easings that are standard easings that you can use. And there's a variety. Like elastic is a nice one. What happens there is if you use out elastic, is it moves quickly in the beginning portion of the transition, and I'll demonstrate some of these in a minute. And then it gets to the end, it shoots past the value it's supposed to hit, and then it bounces back and it shoots past it again, sort of like a rubber band, which is where the name comes from, elastic. So basics. Some of the we didn't show it, and I should have showed it. Let me bring it up here. There are a number of transition functions. There are blink, dissolve. It's a little bit hard to see. Let me zoom in here. Blink, dissolve, fade in, fade out, move by, etc., etc. You know, I don't use most of these. Why do I not use most of these? I know you laugh, and I appreciate the fact that the Corona staff has put these in here. But if we're going to talk about workhorses as far as the transition library goes, transition.to, transition.from, those are the two that I use 99.99% of the time.
Yeah.
All the other ones, except for blink, can be implemented using those two base transitions.
Yeah, and to be fair, they are named or labeled their convenience methods. So you're right, like you say, the to and the from are the kind of the core, the meat of it, and then the rest of them are just gravy on top. So
the transition to and from pretty much give you all the functionality that you would be able to create out of those convenience functions. So I would say that people watching this who are new to transitions, go and learn about to and from, and then consider whether in the future you wish to use the convenience functions, and I think you will find that it's just easier to stick with the to and from, and that it's quicker for you programmatically and learning-wise.
Well, you know,
so
I think
I'm going to demonstrate some of these.
You know, with most things, it's kind of like you'll know that you need it when you know that you need it, right? Like when you've exhausted to and from, and you know that, like, I want to do something different, I want to do something else, and these things don't do it, right? Then you can go in search of something else, but
absolutely
wait until you reach that point.
So let me just give you a visual. So the first folder, One Basics, it's got a very simple project in it. You just run it, and then it loads up here, and you see a bunch of dots with some names next to them and buttons that say Start. And if I click the Start button that is parallel to the dot, it will do this transition. For example, the first one is blink. So I click it, and it starts doing a blink. And if you look at the code, you'll see that I set this blink up to have a period of 1 second. So actually, it's not a period. It's a time of 1 second. That would be a period of half a second. Half a second to blink off, half a second to blink back on. So the time for blink, cut it in half, and that's how long it takes to go between each of the states, on or off. The next one here is dissolve. Now, what dissolve is, it's one of the, it's actually a weird transition. It's the only one that works on two objects at the same time. All of these transitions typically work on a single object, But transition dissolve, really what it's doing is it's taking two objects that most people will put them on top of each other, and it's transitioning visibly between one to the other. So I've got it twice, and I'll show it to you. Let me restart this so the blink isn't annoying us. I will click this one, and what you're going to see is this will go from red to green. Really what you got here is you got two dots on top of each other where one is red and one is green. So you get that nice fade over transition between the two. Now here, I've got the red dot here, but I put the green dot here and then hidden it. I've made the alpha 0. So when I click this, you're going to see this one fade out and this one fade in. So that was the same transition that occurred up here, but I simply moved the other object. So you look like you're raising your hand there.
No. So you applied a movement.
Dissolve. Yeah. Let me show you the code so this is a little more clear.
Okay.
So the blink is I used a helper function which I wrote up above. This is in main.lua, by the way. For all of these examples, I have a helper function that creates a circle, and it draws the text here, and it fills in the color, so I don't have to write the code over and over. So I can make all of this in one line of code. So for the blink example, which starts down on line 91, I create a circle, I fill it with white, I give it a red border, which is what you're seeing here, and then I create a button, and that button will call this function, which for whatever reason I called on start. I should have called it push or do it or something. It doesn't matter what I call it. And what it does is it hides the button, and on line 100 it does the work of the transition. It says transition blink circ, which is the circle that was returned by my helper, time 1000. So blink over a time of 1000, a period of half a second. Oh, and this isn't, the time is in milliseconds. So, and then let's go to dissolve. So with dissolve, like I said, this is one of those weird transition that uses two objects or applies to two objects. What I did here was I made two circles, one right on top of the other. So x140, y130, and then these two fill in. So just to demonstrate what's really going on here, let's make this one not quite far enough over. There we go. So there, now I've moved the first circle over and not moved the second circle. So you can see there's two circles going on at the same time. Undo that. And when we run this one, transition dissolve, we pass in circle 1, circle 2, and a time. Just directly in, no table, nothing. And what that does, simply transitions the alpha for each of those. So one goes from 0 to 1, the other one goes from 1 to 0, but not exactly. It's not exactly that. I don't believe it's a linear cross. I don't think that they both hit 0.5 at the same time. I think one is leading a little bit. That's my sense. It's a little bit hard to tell, but maybe somebody somebody from the forums will know, or somebody from the staff will know. It's not a really critical question.
But to the eye, it serves the purpose.
Yeah, to me, well, okay, so when I separate the two circles in this example, let's go ahead and I set this one to alpha 0. So now both circles are 100%, they're alphaed out, or 100% alpha. Now I click start. That didn't seem to me like they faded at the same rate. That one seems like this one came up a lot faster, and it could be simply because it's green. It could be a visual artifact of the color, right? Tricking the eye. So, but if I do it again, see how fast that one came up? Whereas this one took a long time to fade out.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, very interesting, but not that interesting.
Well, good to keep in mind.
Yeah. So I don't think before today. I think I may have used dissolve one time only. So now on to my favorites, to and from. So a lot of people get into there. They use these for the first time. And they're like, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between to and from? Here's the difference. To is transitioning from where the object's value is. Let's use x as an example. So the x position is right where the dot is now. And the transition is going to go from wherever it is now to wherever you tell it to go, to the X position. That kind of makes sense. From is saying whatever I put in from the X value, as soon as it starts transitioning, it's going to, boom, zoom over there, and then it's going to come back to where it currently is at. So let's take a look at the code before I press it. What I've done here for the 2 is I've said transition to the circle, this here, to whatever my current position is, plus 80 pixels. So what I'm telling it to do is move 80 pixels to the right. And it's going to do that in 1 second. It's also going to move from the current Y position over to plus 80 pixels. And I'll explain in a minute what this table is and how it works. But just bear with me. So when I click this, what's going to happen is this circle is going to move down and to the right. Now, let's go look at the from example. If you examine these side by side, let me just copy the code and paste it. These 2 examples have exactly the same encoding here. X circle.x plus 80, circle.y plus 80. But the from is going to do exactly the opposite. Let me uncomment this. It's going to, as soon as I click start, this object's going to move down here, and then it's going to come back up to the top. And that's all there is to it. There's no mystery. It's important for people to understand that when the transition to and froms execute, what happens is, internally, the transition library says, okay, I'm looking at this object, I'm going to take a sort of like a snapshot of these different values that you're changing. What are they currently? And it's going to keep track of their current value. And then it's going to start to change that value over time. So with the 2, no big deal. It's straightforward. Take the current value, add something to it, or subtract, whatever you may be doing. Change it to something else. But the from is saying, okay, this is where I want it to be to start, and then I'm going to move back to my current position. So,
okay, yeah, that makes sense.
The reason this is important is because people do silly things sometimes with transitions. Not on purpose, maybe, but just because they don't understand. One of the silly things that they may do is they may add a transition to an object, and then a moment later do another transition on the same object. For example, this might happen, let's say that you have an object in your game and it's moving along and the user touches it. And then by touching it, they run some code that adds a transition. But then the user clicks on the object again just a moment later as it's moving. So then you put another transition on there. Same transition code. So what's going to happen? I ran the same transition twice. What's going to happen is the first transition is going to be executing. Let's say it's going to be moving this object from left to right. And then I apply another transition just a few milliseconds later or half a second later. What it's going to do is say, oh, okay, well, the object is now starting here, but it's going to the right. Let me just demonstrate. So here's this, like, see how it's got that little jog at the end?
Yeah.
What happened there, if we look at the code, is I've applied the same transition at 2 different times. So what I did here is I did a transition from x to x plus 80 over a time of 1,000, and then I waited to start that for 800 milliseconds. But then I did another transition right afterwards that started immediately. There was no delay. And again, I'll get back to these parameters in a minute. So what's going to happen here is it's going to start moving. This one's going to start executing first because there's no delay. And then 800 milliseconds, it's going to say, oh, okay, I need to start moving this. But the critical thing is when these 2 lines of code execute, the transition code takes a snapshot. So they both think at the moment this code executes that X is here. Mm-hmm. But when this one really starts doing the work, it thinks that the thing should be way over here. So what you can get is these weird artifacts occasionally where it's like popping back and forth, and you're like, well, why is it doing that? And the reason it's doing that is because one transition got executed instead of the other transition, whoever goes last, in a sense, is going to win the battle.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Because the code, another thing people don't realize with Corona is that it's not threaded. It's just one thing after the other is executing. It's a big list of steps that have to occur frame to frame, and then it just starts all over again on the next frame. So I'm not saying that you can't have two transitions at the same time, but what you want to be careful about is modifying any particular parameter. So these are both modifying the X, which is going to give us this conflict. We're going to get this weird vision. Maybe that's what I wanted, was a weird visual artifact. But, probably not. Rather, I could remember how we did the transition where it moved from left to right and down? I could have done that with two transitions. I could have broken it up, if I wanted to, into two different transitions. And I did. And the reason I want to do that is, you remember how we talked about the easings?
Mm-hmm.
So this one here, when I do it, it moves down in a straight line. But what if I wanted it to move in a curve? What if I wanted it to move down and then sort of like curve around? How could I do that? I could do that by having two overlapping transitions that use the same time but different easings. So the first one is going to move quickly from left to right until it gets about 50%, and then it's going to slow down as it goes the rest of the way from left to right. Whereas this one is going to, I'm sorry, the first one, yeah, I always get these back, in and out. I can't remember. The point is one moves quickly, the other one moves slowly at the first half, and then it sort of flips the other way. So if it moved quickly in the first half, the second half of the move is slower. It gives it what they call the circular motion. Let me just show you what happens. I'm going to do each one separately so you can see by themselves. Okay, yeah, so it starts out in circ, starts slowly, so it started slowly, and then it speeds up as it moves to the right. Now, I'm going to comment that out. I'm going to run the Y movement without circ. Now it's going to move quickly and slow down as it moves to the bottom. So it's going to quickly move down and then slow down. So that doesn't seem very interesting. You're like, yeah, whatever. But now let's put those two together. Run the linear, this one, transition.to first, so you can see the difference. It's going to move in a straight line. Move diagonally. What this one's going to do, it's going to move in a curve.
Okay,
you see how it did that little jog at the end there?
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. This is how you get interesting circular motion out of transitions. And there are 40 other easings that you can apply to get a variety of interesting transitions.
So what I hear, though, there is that just make sure that you understand the timing of when things are going to happen.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that I do all day long, and we're not going to have time to go over it, but this is one of the things that takes so long when working with clients, is you're like, oh, we're using this easing to move something. You're like, I kind of like it, but could you make it move a little quicker at the end or a little faster at the beginning? And you're like, oh, man. Unless you're real familiar with the math of how these easings work, it's really hard to do that off the cuff. So I made a project, which I'll show you next week, called Easings, where you can click on the values in the tool itself, and I'll just open it so while I'm talking here, but we'll go over it in more details. And you can change the values, and then you can see what the different easings will do with different timings. And the two tests are shrinking and growing and moving left and right. So let me get back to the arguments, and then we've got to go to the discussion of our game development. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time.
Okay.
So with transition.to and from, they both take one argument at the beginning, which is the object you want to modify, and then they take a table of parameterized field names and what the value is supposed to be. For example, I want to modify my circle object, and I want to change, let me zoom way in so you can see this. And I want to change the x, so that's the parameterized value that I want to change. And I want to change it to this. So that's what this part of the code is saying. Change x to whatever it currently is plus 80, and then I pass in a time, and I say time equals 1,000. That means do this over a period of 1,000 milliseconds. And if I wanted to delay it after the code executes, but before it starts to do the work, I could say delay equals and say 500. And I would say wait 500 milliseconds and then start doing the transition. And then if I wanted anything besides a linear transition, I could say transition equals easing, and I could use dot one of those 42 transitions. So, and you can find that information on the easings page, which is you go to transitions, click on easing, and then it gives you the name of all of the different easings, and it gives you a nice little visual sort of description so you can conceptually see what the math is doing over time. In other words, it's moving in a straight line over time. Or continuous loop, in sign, out sign. Where's the circ? We just used it. Of course, I can't find it when I'm looking for it. Or elastic. So the elastic's got a very interesting shape. It comes in and it changes up and down. It basically, this is your target value, right? So it's this is where you're starting. This is your target. It's shooting past the starting value, and then it hits the target. And that would be in elastic. But out elastic is it zooms quickly to the target value, shoots past it, comes back, shoots under it, shoots past it, and then sort of wobbles out until it's on the value. That's what this little graph is telling you. In-out elastic is the combination of those two. It wobbles around the starting value, shoots quickly to the target value, wobbles around, and then steadies out. And then out-in is basically it's the counter. It wobbles around the middle and then hits the top.
So right there, I mean, you can see the value of having these already kind of pre-written for you so that you can just tap into them and you don't have to worry about doing the math.
Yep. And just as a hint, or not a hint, but like a teaser, we're going to look at how to do a custom easing. If 42 easings is not enough, you can write your own. That's how awesome Corona is. You can write your own. So we will go over that at a future date. But I don't want to run us out of time before we get to the other exciting bits here, which is together we're going to start making games as part of the Hangout. And the first game that we're going to make together, or the first clone, and I want to say something about the use of the word clone here, that we're going to make is Zigzag Boom, which you noted, interestingly, was, or is, a game made with Unity, which is exciting to me because I want to show, I'm always competitive, I want to show, hey, made with Unity, not made with Unity, I don't care what it was made with. It's easy to make it in Corona, and I think people, when we get to the end of this, are going to say, hey, wow, look at how little code is required to make a beautiful looking game that plays nicely.
Excellent, yeah.
So I said before, but if you look in the Hangouts folder, my Hangouts folder on GitHub, you're going to find a folder called I Can Make That, and under there you're going to find Zigzag Boom Clone. And within this, you're going to find a folder called App, and that's where the game will be when we start to work on it. You'll find another folder called Assets, and all of this is in the README, so when you go to the GitHub, it's going to explain what this is. But another one called Assets, and that is where we will put incoming like images and sound files before we use them in the game. And then there's a Docs folder where I will just be dumping documentation about this as we go along. And that I want to talk to the Docs today before we quit. The way I want to approach this is today I'm going to talk about some of the steps that I take whenever I work on a game. And then next week what I'm thinking we can do is I will take us through the skeleton of the game, sort of like the bits and pieces and how the code is organized and some of the key mechanics that we will be using as we go through the game. And when I say mechanics, what I'm really saying is design choices that we will be using not so much as looking at any specific bits of code. It's just sort of like high level before we even start. This is how we're going to make this game. This is how the bits and pieces, how they're going to talk to each other, know about each other, be organized. So next week for that. This week, the way I look at games before I start to work on them. But before I say that, I use the word clone. I just want to say that, yes, we're making a clone in the sense that we're going to take a game that exists and we're going to duplicate the mechanics, and we're doing this as an exercise. I am not encouraging people to clone games directly. I'm encouraging people to do what I call Me Too Plus. First, absolutely, clone games directly if you want to learn. If you want to go out and make asteroids, go make an asteroids clone. But don't try to sell it. If you're going to try to sell it, you need to do Me Too Plus. Me Too Plus, for me, what that means is you have reproduced the original mechanic, and then you said, how can I make this different? How can I make it better, more interesting? How can I add more flavor, juice, pizzazz? How can I make this mine? You do that, and then I think you're justified in taking something and repackaging it. I'm happy with that. But people who just say, hey, I'm going to duplicate the exact original, I'm going to put it out there and put some ads on it, I'm not so supportive of that. So how do I approach games? You're going to find a document in here called Game Breakdown, and there's a PDF for those of you who do not have OpenOffice. But if you have OpenOffice, you can open it. You can open this folder, which is gamebreakdown.odp. I'm going to open that now, and hopefully it'll work out for me. And I may. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's not exactly what I wanted to show, but whatever. So when I work on any game, be it a clone or a new game, I sit down and do a little bit of homework in advance, and that homework involves the first thing I do is I don't think about the title, but the title of this game is in fact Zigzag Boom, the clone. First thing I do, I kind of write out a few sentences that I think sort of summarize the game. It's like my elevator talk, but not quite as fancy. If I were trying to describe what the game did to somebody, this is what I would tell them. For Zigzag Boom, basically, it's an endless runner where the challenge is to navigate a never-ending hallway with your character, your dot character. The game ends when you run into a wall, and you get points for every corner that you pass, every zigzag that you pass in the hallway. Now, of course, I would have some pictures, and I do, but when people go and look at this game, I think they'll agree that is pretty much the game. That's all there is to it.
Yeah. When I played it, there's I think there's social media integration. There's leaderboard integration.
Yeah, absolutely. And
those
that's
types of
also
things.
part of my evaluation here. But when you talk about purely what the game is,
right,
those three sentences I think summarize it.
Right.
So moving on, then the next thing I do is I try to write down what I call a mechanics list. And I'm using the word mechanics a little bit loosely here. What I try to do is I look at this from a technical aspect and I say, how can I break this down into verbiage that I understand in terms of how things work? If I wanted to break it down into the moving parts and the bits and pieces, what would I say? And for me, that came out to be 2 pages. And the first page was about the player, and this is in no particular order. Okay, don't restrict yourself to an order. Let it be just a free flow of thoughts, and then you can reorganize later. So for the player, what is it? It's a dot, and it ejects some particles and leaves a trail when it moves. That pretty much describes it. The movement of the player is it can move at a 45-degree angle to the vertical. So the screen is up and down. It's portrait. And it moves from bottom to top in a sense. And when it's either moving at an angle of 45 degrees to the left or 45 degrees to the right. And we'll see this when I show you a little video of the game. The other thing is the player can collide with the sides of the hallway. It probably would have helped if I'd shown a picture. Let me show a picture briefly here. So what we're talking about here is a dot that moves left and right through this hallway at a 45-degree angle in either of these angles. And your whole goal is to not hit the walls. It's just to go as far as you can without hitting the walls. Let me go back to my list.
Which sounds fairly easy, but it's very much in the Flappy Bird camp of only being able to get so far before you smash into the wall.
Absolutely. This is one of those. This is one of those frustration games where you're like, oh, I should be able to do this. Why can't I do it? I'm not, I should stop for a moment and say, as I discuss this, I'm not trying to minimize the effort that the people who worked on the original game put in. The people who lead when they do something, they deserve a lot of credit because they don't have the benefit of somebody else's hindsight, right? Mm-hmm. We have the benefit of being able to look at theirs and go, that's not quite. Mine's not working the way theirs works. Let me adjust. When they did it, they're like, I don't know, is this good enough? Is this what we're trying for? I don't know. Maybe we'll try it 10 different ways.
Yeah, putting a mark on a blank sheet of paper is much more intimidating than putting additional marks. Yeah, tracing the picture, tracing the final picture.
Right, we're tracing. They drew the original. Inputs. Basically, the inputs on this game, there's two kinds. There's buttons, but in the game itself, it's a one-touch input. In other words, anywhere on the screen you touch makes the character turn left or turn right. So it's a one-touch game. The hallway itself, what is it? It's composed of parallel lines. Yes, they may be artistically interesting, but if we break it down, they're nothing more than parallel lines. And they zig and zag randomly, and the width of the hallway will vary over time. Sometimes more narrow, sometimes wider.
Yeah, I haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah, I know. Well, if you get past like 3, you'll start to see that it gets narrow. So, how about the camera? So when we say camera in a 2D game, what we're saying is with relation to the character, how does the rest of the world move around? Is the character always in the center of the screen? Is the character allowed to move up to the upper left, upper right? And when the character moves, what does the rest of the world do? Does it move to reorient so that it seems as if the player is moving in the world? So one way to do a camera is the character stays in the middle all the time, and the world moves around it. So the character looks like it's moving relative to the ground or to whatever is in the scene, but the scene is doing all the moving with relation to the actual screen. I'll go back over this in a minute when we look at the video, but this game is like that. The character stays in the middle of the screen, and the world moves around it to give the sense of movement. In addition to that, this game implements a parallax background. So what that means is that the background has multiple layers which can be seen through each other, in this case, and as the character moves, one layer will move a little more quickly than another moves, and what that does, it gives us a sense of depth. So for example, Mario Brothers, when the character is moving, it may have multiple layers in the background, and the nearest layers will move quickly, the furthest layers will move more slowly, and it gives you this sense of like the world has depth.
Just as an interesting side note, I heard one time that Walt Disney actually pioneered doing a lot of that in their animated films because they would put everything on cellulose and they'd put it into layers, and then when they would take all the individual frames, then they would move different pieces at different times, or different pieces would be fuzzy because they were farther away, and all that kind of stuff like that, which gave the animation depth. Yeah, they used basic techniques to fake things that are eyeball. Yeah, even though it's a flat 2D bunch of images all on top of each other, it creates this sense of depth. So.
Yeah, it fools the brain into thinking there's depth where there is no depth. So design settings. When I say design settings, it's like my bucket of things about the game that really don't have to do with how the world is designed. It's so much as like the orientation of the device, portrait. In other words, it's going to be held in your hand, with the taller part is up and down, and the narrower part of the device is left and right. Hopefully that makes sense. Everybody knows what portrait is. Yeah. Aspect ratio targets. So I don't target resolutions. I target aspect ratios. And what that means is I don't target 1024 by 768, but I target 16 by 9 or 4:3, which that's the same thing. But anyway, 16:10. And so the target ratios for me are always the iPhone 5, 6, and 6 Plus ratios as my number one target. And then my secondary is iPad. So I make it look good on iPhone 5 and 6. These are all actually the same aspect ratio. And then I do whatever I need to do, and we'll talk about that at a future date, to make it also look presentable, not the same, presentable on the iPad. And if you do that, you've covered, I'd consider, most of your market. So yes, there's a whole another market, which is Android, but, and I don't know why it just changed on me, but if you've done the work for these two, you're going to cover, by definition, most of the Android targets. Special hardware requirements? None. Doesn't require any special input or shaking or any of that stuff. I mean, your phone may have it, but we're not going to use it. Game logic. Very simple game logic. The player gains a point every time they go past a corner, a zigzag, and they die as soon as they hit a wall. That's it. There's all there is to it. There's no lives. There's no, you get to start over again. You don't get to spend coins. You're not collecting anything. It's just going around corners. Now, you know what? I haven't played the game beyond like 5 corners, so they may have expanded the mechanics beyond what I'm listing here. But in the beginning part of the game, that's all there is to it. Next, what I like to do is I like to break down what's called a interface inventory. So when we're developing games, we all kind of we play with the fun part. We do the play GUI. We're doing mechanics, and we don't consider, I think, oftentimes, all the other stuff that you need to wrap on there before you can publish your game. Some of the things you need to wrap on there is a launch screen. You probably want a splash screen, the screen that comes up after it launches but before it goes into the menu. Usually you put like your company title or like a quick credits listing there, not the credits itself. Then you got your main menu, which is this image right here. You can kind of see in a smaller bit. And that the main menu gives you access to playing the game, going to the leaderboard, clicking on the options button, all that good stuff. They have a thing called Everplay. I do not know what that is. I think that is a custom library made for the Unity community, which is, I believe what it is a social hangout, like a, what do you call it? Like a, not like a forum, but like where people can go hang out and connect and
almost a Facebook page kind of thing.
Yeah, but I think it's live.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it may be, we're not going to do it. Then there's leaderboards and achievements, and for this game, those are the traditional ones that are supplied by either Apple or Google Play. There is an in-app purchase screen where you can make a purchase to disable the ads, because this is a ad-based game. There's an info page, an options page, and then in pink here, I have interstitial ads and banner ads. This game has interstitial, which is full page screen, full page ads, and it has banner ads at different times. Now, I've marked these as blue and pink and black. If it's blue, we're going to address it at some point. If it's pink, we might address it in the future, probably not part of the original series. And if it's black, we're not going to address it at all. Now, in-app purchase, maybe. I don't know. I might change my mind about that in the future. But for now, we're going to be spending 99% of our time talking about the play GUI. I know, the part that I said everybody does. But we will also come back and say, all right, we've done all the work, we made the game, it's fun, what do we need to strap on here to make it finished? And that'd be the launch, splash, main menu, info, and options. Those are like almost required. You got to have those. All right, next.
And just as a tie into that, I mean, if you watched the Composer series that we just finished up, Ed did supply a what would you call it, Ed? You had a name for it. Basically,
a framework.
A framework, yeah, for Composer scenes where you have the menu and the credits and the all that those bits there. So if you're kind of
In fact, we'll use that when we do this later on.
Yeah. So if you're wanting to kind of jump ahead, you can go back and look at the Composer series that we did, or you can just wait till we get to it.
Yep. All right. I'm going to speed through the rest of these. You can look at these on your own. Another thing I do is I cheated this time and took screenshots, but I suggest for people who are doing this on their own, especially when they're coming up with their own game idea, I like to longhand draw pictures of what I'm thinking. It's really critical that you draw some pictures and make some notes before you ever write any code, because you're going to save yourself a lot of time saying, oh, that sounded good in my head, but when I got it down on paper, even before I ever saw it on the screen, I can see a problem. I think you will find that when you do this. Okay. There's a page in this document. I don't normally do this. I did it for you guys, where there are links where you can get this. There's an Android version, an iOS version, and there's some links also. And I think I'll give these to Charles for the notes on this show, where you can go and watch videos. I always watch videos when I am looking at somebody else's work. It's one thing to play it, but it's completely different to sit there and be able to analyze it while somebody else plays it. You get a different sense. You can really think about it a little bit more. You're not hung up and trying to not die or hit the wall. All right, let's see. The rest of this is we're gonna start talking about this in the future. This document is actually going to grow a little bit because there's some more steps that I don't have time to cover today. It's not appropriate at this point. But once I've done these prior steps, then I start to really break things down. I start to think, okay, what are the bits and pieces that I'm really going to have to make? In other words, what are the different kinds of objects? Come on now, change. How do they interact? Do they collide with each other? When they collide with each other, what do they do? And so on and so forth. So, like I said, this document is going to grow, and we will talk to it as we do the coding, so that it is clear what we're working on and what some of the steps are to get to that coding step.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think that's a great place to stop. I know that, just to reiterate, I know we had talked about this before. You said, this is kind of a checklist, if you will, of things that you go through whenever you're either creating a game from scratch or examining a game that you want to maybe reproduce some of the mechanics for. So we will probably see this again over and over, as we do additional games in different styles. So as we do this series, we've picked, the kind of the endless runner as our first example, but we'll do other styles and other mechanics as we go along. But Ed's put together a nice little checklist that kind of gives you the starting point of your thought process. So thanks, Ed, for doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there you go. We'll continue the conversation next week with a little more in-depth look at the parts of the game and how they interact, and then we'll also do the next part of the discussion on transition library and how to use to create motion in your games.
Mm-hmm. There's one thing for the audience. I know it's very last second, but those listening who want to give us feedback on the first show and sort of set the direction for the rest of these, Charles and I were talking before the show, and one of my conundrums is I'm a lazy programmer. So as much as I want to show people how to do things, there are certain things that I hate doing. One of those things I hate doing, collision calculations, setting up the bit masks. As many of you will know, I have a library called SSK. I use it all the time for my own stuff. And there are certain things that I just never do what I call longhand. And so I would propose, people listening can say, no, you can't do that. You got to show us how to do it the first time. I would propose that on this first game, there are a few things that I will use SSK for, but most things will be longhand. One of those things that I will use SSK for is doing the collision setup, because I can do it in SSK in 2 or 3 lines of code, and you will understand what is happening just by reading it. Or I can show you longhand over a half hour to an hour of discussion, and we'll get to the end, and you'll say, Ed, what? Or you may understand. I'm not saying, some people may understand, but I'm just saying, when I was in your shoes the first time, and I'm like, what? I got to do that a couple times on my own before I even grasp it. And in this case, for Corona, 99% of the time, you could just use my library and you'll get by. So yeah. I would propose that we do that.
And it's relevant to this discussion because as we go through the game mechanics, we want to highlight the different concepts that are involved in the development of the game, and at some point you can transition between concepts and really get down in the weeds on things, and sometimes that might leave people a little lost. So we want to make sure that we're addressing the concepts and then being able to provide you with code that you can kind of snap together in order to get a final product. So like I'd say, and there's always a case where you might want to do something the long way because of some edge case that you need to accomplish. But there might be a time when you just say, you know what, I know how to create a button. I only want to do it one way, and I just want to do it in a couple of lines of code, and because I got 6 buttons on the screen, and I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it any longer than that. And so we'll try to preserve the concept discussions, and then when it makes sense, break out the in-depth, long way to do it, if you will. So what's important, though, I think, and maybe this is what you're saying, is that you need to tell us. So if we cover something and at some point you're like, that's great, I understand the concept, but I would like to know a little bit more about how that works, then we need your comments. You need to tell us that you want to discuss that, and then we'll, on a future show, we'll choose an appropriate place to have that conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Perfect. Exactly.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for being here. We appreciate your time. So be here next Monday at noon Pacific. We'll talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. Until then, have a great week and happy coding.
Adios.
Adios. Oh, it's a new one.